All right, everyone. We're so excited today. As we said, we have Jennifer Brown here of Jennifer Brown Consulting, and she's going to be sharing with her insights from her book. Let me just show you guys the book. So if you don't have it, make sure you get it.
There
and
it is.
Yes, how to be an inclusive leader. We know at this time how critical inclusion is. We hear the conversations around diversity, and we know that that's step one. So we just really want to take it to make sure we have a holistic implementation. And so, Jennifer, thanks so much for being here with us and sharing. So before we kick off, the first thing we have to hear from you is, for you, what does gender diversity mean?
It means that we are invited to the table and that we are engaged in meaningful dialogue and asked our opinion, right? And that opinion is valued and utilized and acted upon. So, diversity, as we know, is not just who's around the table, but how we are included. And so I think that we need to look beyond representation, which is certainly the first step and what we often associate with diversity. But it goes beyond that to sort of how are we including all that wisdom and that diversity of experience, identity, thought, all those great things that create more innovation, that create better teams, right? That cause people to stay in organizations, not just come, but actually stay, thrive, grow, be advanced, and seeing more of ourselves eventually in the C-suite, which is where we belong.
Exactly where we belong. Exactly. I'm just sometimes just so annoying why everyone else just doesn't get it. And the numbers are there. The data is there to prove that when we're there, we make a difference. And we still are trying to say, please let us help us make a difference in your company.
We shouldn't have to beg for that. I mean, come on. Anyway, well,
yeah,
and work to do.
Yeah, it's so crazy. So I love when you talk about, not just being at the table, but also being involved in. Too many times we hear, that, when we invited someone to the table, we didn't see them have an impact. And I think that kind of really would speak to the inclusion piece, because it's not just sitting at the table, but it's being actively involved around the table, allowing someone to have a voice, respecting the opinion that they have. And so we're the place where we are now, where almost diversity and inclusion has almost become buzzwords or a trend. I'm not even sure if anyone's even looking at the business case of it anymore. It's just like, just bring a person in. For those who are still a little bit like resistant in that and still saying like, well, why do we have to do this? What could we do as diversity practitioners to start getting other people involved, getting them to listen and, to get them to realize that this is very, very important?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, business case is what I'm endlessly asked for, honestly. Like, really? Do you need more statistics? Like, there's something called Google. There's plenty of information. I'm like, why are you paying me to give you something and I think it's honestly, sometimes it's a resistance or a delay tactic. It's like, give me more data, give me more data. It's at some point, you've got to kind of stop with that and say, okay, we're ready to commit and do the work. And that's kind of where I hope to meet people at that stage, because then we can really roll up our sleeves and get into it. But yes, I think the resistance is, so there's apathy. There literally is like a not knowing that we have a problem. I think that's very widespread. I think people and organizations want to think they're great and they don't have any problems.
Yeah.
And so that's very enticing to say, oh, I'm a good person. I'm a good leader. I believe in equality, right? I don't see color.
I don't see color.
Sadly, is something, right? But
I treat everyone the same.
Right. Yes. It's a meritocracy, which is not true and never has been. Or I have daughters. I love that one. Please watch AOC's takedown of that. Oh my goodness.
Yes,
so good. So good.
Yeah.
So I think that that sort of the danger of the well-meaning person, and that is not, it is mistaking. Yeah, like it's mistaking my like values for action. They're not the same, right? And the action, particularly on the part of leaders, is what's going to change organizations for not the short term but the long term. And we need leaders to actually not just believe like, well, because I believe this, like it will sort of manifest around me, but that they are literally going to the mat and saying like, asking the hard questions, challenging the policies and procedures for equity, like seeing things through that lens. We need more people, particularly at the top, knowing what questions to ask
Mm-hmm.
and being consistent and keeping the pressure on. And the problem is that that group of people tends to be, white, straight, and male, typically,
Yeah.
and I think knows the least about
Mm-hmm.
the facts, the statistics, the lived experience, the ability to even just have proximity to people that are different than you, not just in the workplace, but in our lives also. So I think that there's a real danger and risk for leaders to be so isolated from the facts, from the truth, from the experience, by identity, isolated as well, to say, oh, I don't know a person in the LGBTQ community, right? So that's, to me, that's a liability now, because then you can't lead a diverse constituency. You can't hope for followership if you haven't sort of done the work yourself. And you can do it as an aspiring ally. You just have to be incredibly intentional about it and take some serious concrete steps to like stay on that journey. And it's very learnable. It's just, to me, it hasn't been a priority. And now everyone's in a panic. I'm so here for that. I'm like, so maybe you should have been paying attention to this a while ago.
Just a year ago,
Maybe
even just a year ago. Like, how
just a
about
year ago.
how about when we were talking the Me Too movement? If you just did something then, what a
Right?
difference that would really make. And so I'm just wondering now, okay, so we have like this like pandemonium, everyone is like, we gotta do something, we gotta do something. And we have the fire brigade out there. How do we ensure that right now this is not like the Me Too movement? We were all, up in arms about it. Everyone came out with, their sexual harassment, no tolerance policy. How do we ensure that our inclusion is not going to pass away, that our policies, our practices, our strategies that we're putting in place, that they are sustainable?
Yeah. Say, well, that's like the biggest question right now. And because we have a bad habit of being short term thinkers, the business world is all about the short term, I think. And we're in survival mode, right, with the pandemic as well. So I do worry about competing priorities
Yes.
and people not being able to synthesize how do these all relate to each other and fit together. And am I going to can I keep my head down until it's over?
Yeah.
Right. And then we go back to whatever it was. Yeah.
Pass.
Yeah. No. So I'm like, no, this isn't going away. And by the way, like social justice and, equity is a core value of younger generations in
Yeah.
particular. Right. So they're not going to let this go. It's not going to just, go away, or it's literally going to continue, I think, to define what talent wants to see and what customers want to see. They, people that buy, women and people of color and LGBTQ people and other diverse buying groups are the fastest growing, groups of wealth, right? So we are consumers, we make decisions, we want to know there's an alignment there, and we want to know that a brand is not just marketing to us but walking the talk as well. So,
Yeah.
and we're in a transparent world, so we can see everything you're doing, we can read Glassdoor, we can, we know we're very loyal,
We
I
can
think,
get
as we
your
do our
board.
homework. Yeah, we can look at your board. Yeah. And so I think that, those companies are really, like, again, taking a big gamble when they don't really take this seriously and start to bake it into the DNA. And that's what's going to make it consistent and sustainable, is that this is not just a one and done Black Lives Matter post or unconscious bias trainings. In fact, when we get calls as a consulting company and they say they want to do that, we say, well, we're not sure we want to be a part of that, because that sounds like check the box to us. It's not going to do the trick. It also kind of backfires. And what you really need is a strategy, like a year or two long strategy that you've thought through, that you've engaged all of your stakeholders in, that you've well researched with your employees to understand, like, is this going to hit the mark and make a difference? And how are we going to hold ourselves accountable? And what are the metrics? All that stuff that makes a really good strategic plan. We partner to build those. And so I think that is honestly, the really best way, I think, to bake this in is to treat it as a business strategy, just like anything else you would launch and follow through on and hold yourselves accountable for and measure and tweak and adjust.
Hmm.
It's got to be a sort of hygiene for the organization. And we've got to get people comfortable being uncomfortable, because this topic makes particularly some of us uncomfortable, for whom it's unfamiliar, new, or maybe makes us feel like we're the bad, like I'm a bad person and I've done something wrong because
Yeah.
I didn't know this, or like I don't know what to do. And so there's a lot of that kind of nurturing that we think of it as like nurturing the learner through a process. And part of that process is the denial and the protection of yourself and your ego and all those things that kind of pop up when you're hearing some hard truths from your coworkers that you didn't know, I guess. I mean, you and I have probably been showing this information for a long time, and I would argue you have been shown, you have been told, but you weren't curious to dive in, and you didn't get invested in shifting it, and now you're doing it in a scramble. You're doing it too quickly, because I don't think it's something that should be done quickly. I think
It
things
can
that we
be.
care
It
about,
can be.
right, they need to be done in a sustainable, even if it's a slow way. I would prefer slow and deep than fast and surface.
Well, because we're talking sustainable. We want something to stick. And if we're talking about changing people's behavior, changing the culture of an organization, it's not because you had a training. It's behavior, it's habits, it's mindsets. It's so much more than what you're going to learn in a 45-minute. I don't even care if you have a 5-day, 8-hour training. It's so much more than that. So definitely sustainable, practical solutions is what organizations need to be looking for at this time. And not just time, just like every time. I mean, constantly, because
Right.
it's not an evergreen. So it's not going to be like one and done. Oh, we created our strategy this year and it worked. And then, so that's it. We're gone. So,
Oh, done.
so yeah, like,
People are so predictable. We all do it, it's human. I think it's we got to keep the pressure on. We do. And I want employees who have found their voice through this whole process to keep using those voices. Like
yes,
we need to really
yes,
we
yes,
need to keep ringing the bell, and saying this is not going away, and it's going to make our business better. It's going to, the benefits of this exercise, as painful and uncomfortable as it might be, is preparing these organizations for the future. It's just happening in a way that is uncomfortable because it's overdue. And so there's then all this
yes,
pressure that's built up, right? And now the floodgates kind of were lowered, and I'm a fan. That's why I'm a fan of like, do this as like hygiene every day, so that you
yeah,
don't have to deal with an influx, because nobody makes good decisions when you're under the gun.
yes,
You don't have a lot of time, right? That's when bias can really contaminate something, is when, oh my gosh, like we've seen it, right, with like filling a slate of candidates. Like,
yes,
oh well, we didn't have time, and like here's who we could grab, and when you were grabbing things, chances are they look all the same.
yeah.
And we're not
Or
taking that
chances are
moment.
you went all the way to the other side and you're like, oh, we just got a bunch of diverse people, and you really did
True.
not get the kind of people that we needed who's going to stand up and do the job. And then people say, well, see, that's why we didn't hire that way before,
Oh,
because
I
that didn't work.
know.
So that
Oh, I hate
gun,
that.
yeah, fast gun approach doesn't work. And
Mm.
it's so true when you're saying that, when you're in this kind of pain and you're trying to make an adjustment, and it feels more painful. So it's almost, I think about it like a toothache. Your tooth was gnawing at you and you just ignored it. But if we went to the dentist 5 months ago, we'd have gotten a filling, and now it's a
It's
whole root canal or something, all because we ignored it. And that's basically what we're doing. We're like in there doing root canals,
that's exactly what it is.
or extracting, extracting or excavation.
I'm going to steal that. That is such a good analogy.
You know,
It's great.
because
I
they
also think, on the allyship front, I think of it like a marathon. And I think a lot of people right now are like jumping into a marathon without
yes,
having trained. They're literally like, I'm an ally, and I can have these hard conversations. And like, no, no, no,
yes.
because guess what? You're going to cause more harm. You're just going to perpetuate
And
this.
you're going to get harmed, because when you hear some of the things, I mean, like, you
That's
have no self-care mechanism around to support you after you've thrown
you're
yourself
right.
into a community you know nothing about. And
You are so
experience,
right.
just even, the external, just hearing some of the trauma, you have nothing to, what do you do? What do you do with that? So it's
You
that.
have you have no you have no resilience for it.
Yes,
Like,
yes,
right? And the
very,
resilience to me is like, your muscles as you train them for a marathon, you start months ahead, you build up,
yes,
you build up your resilience and your strength, and the muscle gets stronger, and then you're able to run the race without injury, which
yeah,
is important, because the other thing I don't want to have happen is people get so overwhelmed and burned out and
yes,
paralyzed that
yes,
they, or injured, right? Something goes wrong and I feel horrible about it. And so I'm not going to try it again. I'm going to sort of go back,
yeah,
take my
yeah,
marbles and go home for a while. I'm like, we can't afford people to do that. We've got to stay in this and actually see it through. And we've got to do that together. We can't just
yeah.
like delegate this to the D&I team,
It's
right?
a
Because
community effort. I mean, you don't change a culture
yes,
by asking one department to do all the work and everybody sits down and observes. So this is not a spectator sport. Everyone absolutely has to be on the field, fully dressed and ready to go. And so when I think about that, because there's so many, right now, there's so much focus really on the African American in the Black community with the Black Lives Matter. But this is a community game. All identities, all communities need to be involved, because especially when we're talking about intersectionality, that all communities are affected. So the LGBTQ community is affected in a disproportionate way. The women, women are affected. This differently able community are still affected in the Black Lives Movement in such a different way. So we have to start to address them in that way. But I also have a deep concern of, like, are we so tunnel focused that we also are leaving out a community as so we're not being inclusive while we're doing this
mm,
work. Um,
yeah,
we got so focused on Me Too movement, we focused on women, and then we now forgot. And right now, especially in this time with the pandemic, the Asian community is feeling a lot of pain, but
mm,
we're not talking about it. It's
that's
kind of
true.
like, we'll get to you later. Well, we don't.
We only can focus on one thing at a time. We
So
can't walk and chew gum.
yeah. So how do we, as we're creating these strategies, make sure they are inclusive of all communities? So we don't have this uh, anti-racist stand, but being racist at one point, because we're just leaving out a whole community of people as well,
That's
or
right.
we're
That's right.
leaving out, some identity. So how do we, as we're creating these inclusive strategies, make sure we're inclusive?
Yeah, I love that question. That keeps me up at night too, because I always say, just because you've been the victim of bias and you're in a marginalized community does not mean you are not a biased person also,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So we aren't perfect. We aren't perfect when, you've experienced marginalization and that gets you, somewhat of the way there. But the work of being an inclusive leader and human is still remains for all of us. And we've got to look at ourselves first and practice and walk this
mhm,
talk, right? We've got to, in the LGBTQ community, I often, in pre-pandemic days, I would be the only woman in the room, say, because it's, where I live, there's a lot of finance companies, and the mixers are mainly white cisgender gay men. And so as I've learned about privilege and the role that how we in communities that are marginalized continue to perpetuate the
yeah.
status, right? We, unless those white straight gay men are very vigilant to say, and not just come to me and say, Jennifer, can you get us some women? It's not just even that,
Got
right?
a whole bunch
It's
of them in
like,
your backyard just waiting.
but they don't want to come because they don't feel welcome in this space.
Yes,
Okay, right?
not just getting them there. Can you, like,
Yeah,
allow them to, talk, value their opinion,
that's right.
stop cutting them off
Yeah,
at the beginning.
exactly. That's right. That's right. So male privilege and white privilege still exists. And I might say male privilege exists in communities of color. Who knows, right? We could sort of parse this
Yeah,
and
yeah,
continue.
it does.
LGBTQ people that are also people of color are dealing with sort of that intersectional identity.
Mm-hmm.
and the double binds and the triple binds and all of it. So I think that my solution and recommendation always is that everything we do in the organization needs to be done through an intersectional lens.
Yes.
So affinity groups, for example, like many of them have kind of replicated in this way we're talking about. Like I might encounter a women's group and there's no LGBTQ people in it. There's no women of color in it. It is
Yeah.
white woman dominated.
Yeah.
And I'll say, like, so let's think about who's not feeling welcome to join and attend and be a part of this. And how can you shift your programming so that you make that a priority? You set goals. Each group should be intersectional in its membership and also in the leadership of the group and in the mission of the group, the vision, right? That statement should speak to, I think, the experiences of all women,
Yeah.
including trans women, including Black and brown women, including the people with disabilities community, mental, and then there's like invisible diversity dimensions we also need
Yeah.
to make sure are represented,
And we
right?
ignore
Mental
it because we
health.
can't see it.
Exactly, like parenting. There's so many things that maybe this has been revealed in the pandemic because we've been beaming into each other's living rooms and we maybe can't hide anymore as much as we used to be able to. But we've got to kind of we've got to be the standard bearers about who's not in this conversation. What are
Mhm.
we not talking about? Let's role model it for our organization so that they can look to us and understand what the true promise of intersectionality really is, which is that we are having these multifaceted conversations about I would argue universal themes. Exclusion is universal. As you said, with the Asian American community, like racism is experienced not in the same way, but it's the same sort of thread. And
Mhm.
so I think horizontally as well as vertically, like vertical may be the identity, but think about the horizontals that run through,
Yes.
our siloed approach that of the old days, right? And by the way, millennials and younger talent very much see themselves as multifaceted. So we have to fix this too, because we've got to, I think, market ERGs in particular to say, like, these are places where all identities are needed and valued versus join the Black group or join the LGBTQ
Yes.
group. Or I
Yes.
think that's going to become, I don't know if it's going to go away, but I expect
Yeah.
it to
Yeah. Yeah.
change.
It definitely needs a shift because the group that's set up to address an identity is leaving out so many identities within their identities. And so
Right.
yeah, I mean, so yeah, because like you said, I mean, if I'm part of a women's group, I'm almost sure that the things that they're addressing don't necessarily, well, they could affect me, but there's so many more things that do not affect me because I'm not, okay, so I'm not a white, I'm a, I'm an African American heterosexual woman. So when it comes to the heterosexual part and being a woman, we're all together. But then afterwards, some of the approaches that they're asking us to take um, only align to white women. And so the rest, we're just sitting there like, I can't do that. I can't say that.
Mm-mm,
No,
mm-mm,
I'm not going to do that because that's not going to work for me. So they're like,
right.
oh, so then I go to the African American group and they're like, all these manly things. And we're like, well, that doesn't work for me either. So, oh, okay. So where can I go? So
It's it's
I
Goldilocks and the Three Bears, like too hot, too cold. Where's the just right?
love that. Yeah. Right. This is too cool. This
Oh,
part. So it's really true. I think that we're going to see we need to see a shift in
we do.
strategic focus of our ERGs if they're going to be effective. Because one of the things that they're supposed to be linked to business outcomes. And if you're linked to
Yes.
business outcomes, you have to realize that your community that you're serving, your client, is so diverse. And so how are you being so homogeneous in your thought process and not addressing the true community that you're actually out there to serve? So how do we
Mm,
start, mobilizing and making sure that we are inclusive? So you talked about the ERGs. Are there anything else that we could do to get everyone else to start leading in a very inclusive manner? I think diversity, we get that, but we
mhm,
gotta
mhm.
start really focusing on not just getting them in, but keeping them in and keeping them
That's
happy when they're
right.
in.
So true. And that's a whole different question, right? I think if you get them, can you keep them? And
Yeah.
if you can keep them, can you raise them up? Like, can
Yeah.
you enable people to thrive fundamentally, right? And want to stay? I mean, honestly,
Yeah.
retention is like a huge bottom line impact when we continue to lose all kinds of talent because they just can't handle it anymore because
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
exhausting. And it's so unfair. And yet nobody's doing anything about those factors. That's when we have one foot out the door and we're poachable, right? Or,
Yeah.
we start to look elsewhere. So I think the cost to get people in and then lose them is what, 3 times somebody's salary, I
Yes.
think,
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
organization. And
3.5 to 4 times.
we
Yeah.
should track that as a metric. But the other, of course, so it's demoralizing, it's inefficient, and it's really bad for sort of the optics of things to have. This is why I think many of us don't make it through the gauntlet of the pipeline, because we spin out, we sort of
Mm-hmm.
fall out.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time then we look at the C-suite levels and maybe the top 2 or even 3 levels of many companies, we don't see a lot of diversity left, because it's been so difficult. And we haven't been, I think, pulled up, particularly with sponsorship activities. So mentorship and sponsorship, different
Yeah.
things.
Yes.
Sponsoring is somebody with power joining their capital to yours. And so it's somebody literally not just coaching you behind the scenes, which is mentoring,
Yeah.
but literally playing your card and saying, like, I think this person can do this stretch assignment. We should think about her, and give her a chance. Or working with us saying, I'm going to put you forward for this, and I just wanted you to know, so you're going to get a call.
Right.
And I'm vouching for you because I think it's great. A, it's the right next role for you. And B, like, I think you've got what it takes. And, that kind of, to me, shortcuts a lot of the problems of bias in organizations. Like, we don't,
Honest, I
somebody
think
doesn't,
so.
right? Like, we just don't get thought of, or we get that performance feedback, like we don't have executive presence, or, oh, they haven't done this before. And then we feel small too. Like, women do this thing where we don't believe we can do something until we have 100% of the qualifications. We do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And we need to emulate, I hate to say this, we need to emulate men more. Like, I watch men very carefully, because they built this business world. They're the ones that built it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm a guest in that world. So we
Yep.
are guests, right? But so
It's an interesting.
understanding those rules is critical, and playing that game is important until we can change that game, which we should also be doing. But in the meantime, we don't want to pay the dearest price by not achieving what we know we can do. So you've got to kind of understand the game, change the game at the same time.
Yes.
And playing that game is what is the language that people use here? Like, what is the inside group talking about? And if you can get people on the inside to pull you up and, in a way, protect your career path and protect you, it's sort of air cover, I think, of for many of us need that, because there's so much bias coming at us
Yeah.
that air cover is really needed to kind of deflect it and make sure that obstacles that some of us experience that others don't are removed. And the
Mm-hmm.
only person that can remove obstacles is somebody more senior than you.
Yes.
It's
Absolutely.
right. We can't do that obstacle removing ourselves. That's
And
why
it's
we're
very
where we're at.
difficult to run the hurdle and move the race and move the obstacle at the same time.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
someone has
All
to
of that.
go before you and take that obstacle out of your way before you get there.
That would be great too. So lift as we climb, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I have this great sponsor, but like, what's the good if I make it there and I pull the
Yeah.
ladder up?
Yeah. 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 So
Yeah.
and I'm glad you're talking about sponsorship and mentorship and the core differences, because as women and as diversity practitioners, usually that's the first go-to when people say, well, we want to bring more women in, we want to develop more women. Oh, let's have a mentorship program. And we have seen how they're not as effective. I don't want to say they're ineffective, but they're not giving us the results that we want. And it is the sponsorship, when someone is lending that capital, when someone is talking about you when you're not in the room, or pitching for you when you're not in the room, because having that mentorship, great. So I have better skills. No one knows it. I'm still in my cube, knocking my head to the wall, and no one even knows I exist. But that exposure. So I'm glad that you brought that to the forefront again. So when we're creating our inclusion strategies, sponsorship should be there. It should be.
Agreed. And can I make a point about that, Sable? Like, I think also the reason it hasn't been effective is it hasn't been like required. And I know maybe some people don't like, I think we struggle with leaders basically not liking to be forced to do things.
Yes.
Like,
We're
it's
afraid
sort of a perennial, like, if I had my druthers, there'd be a quota for diverse boards like tomorrow. Like, it's ridiculous that we are sitting there sort of
Feeling.
suggesting,
Yeah.
right?
Countries
Like, we're
have
going to be
done it. It's
waiting
working.
forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not working. So I think that my fantasy is literally the responsibility is assigned to raise diverse talent, diverse, defined however we define it, and that each executive is charged with, high potential lists
Yeah.
to foster, to support, to remove obstacles for, to know better, like just as well as you know your own career path, you know
Yeah.
their career path, and
Yes.
you
Yes.
know you're an advocate, and you're literally like responsible for ensuring that that cohort makes it through to a certain level in the organization. I mean, imagine that. It's not about chemistry. It's not about like whether I know your family. Like, it's not like this whole sort of ad hoc, like secret
I don't need to
thing
come to
that's
your
like going on.
barbecues at your house, your
No.
kid's birthday. Give me the promotion.
Yeah, seriously.
Say
So
my
I think we have
name.
to
Say my name.
make it real. Make it real and make it required. Like,
Yeah.
that's what I think, because if we leave this to chance, it's literally going to continue to be like, who's the squeaky wheel who's getting on my calendar for mentorship? And by the way, like, again, women aren't great at like asking for that
Yeah.
time and saying like, I want you to be my, not just mentor, but imagine asking somebody to be your sponsor is a really tough conversation.
Yeah.
And usually people sort of wiggle out of it in when they talk about why they don't want to mandate programs like this, because they chalk it up to chemistry. But chemistry exists between people that are homogeneous. Like, the whole chemist to me,
Isn't
what
it
I
dating?
hear in chemistry is
Isn't it
like we live
dating?
in the
Like,
same,
we're not dating.
yeah.
We don't need chemistry. We're not
No.
dating.
It,
Because
it's
even your team, the team that you select, that or the team that you're given as a leader, do you have to have chemistry with all of them so you can manage them or so you can lead them? You are
the
given a
point.
team. Sometimes, we're lucky enough to choose who our team players are, but sometimes we're given a team. We inherit a team. And we don't get
Mm,
to say, well, I'm not going to coach this person in their performance, or I'm not going to evaluate them, or, lead this team because I don't have chemistry in them. So I agree like 100% that
mm.
chemistry should not be a reason why we don't sponsor someone. And I think that also goes back to the cultural fit, when we're bringing people in, all
Yes,
these,
totally.
funny things that we use to exclude people who we're not comfortable with or we've not been around before. So yeah,
Right.
I think that is so, so critical. So I want to ask you a question before you go. I mean, I can talk to you from like to like another 200
I
hours.
know, I know. I feel like you and I are like, doo, doo. It's
Um,
good.
so one of the things that we always like to ask our guests. So what would be if you we're giving you the DNI magic wand, and you get to swirl it wherever which way you go, what would be the one thing that you would change that you can do overnight?
Oh, wow. Well, I just kind of said it. I think we've got to we can't wait. We cannot wait until people come around to understand. It's difficult to wait. So, and I know we have to, and it's important for change management to stick and for something to be sustainable. You got to win over heads and hearts, and I believe that. And so I spent a lot of my time kind of coaxing and,
Yes, yes, yes.
convincing, and, so I wish that I could just get to the work, honestly. But I do think representation is really important for so many reasons. And so I'd probably say that I think if I could have all the leaders of business commit to, and I don't want to hear excuses about we can't find the talent doesn't exist. I don't want to hear it. Like, at every level of organizations, there needs to be a representative sampling of our world and the demographics of the world that a company does business in. And then that mix, the pie chart, it continues every subsequent level up, that we retain that diversity, because that's where it thins out. And I just think that if we could do that, automatically, I think we would start to build a more diverse Fortune 500 CEO list, more diverse boards, more diverse executive teams. And then, having us at the table at those levels means that we're going to lead differently. We're going to, infuse the organization with, in my case, it would be like more empathy. But, not to be gendered about, male leaders can be incredibly empathetic as well. But I do think that we've lacked diversity at that level, and we've missed out on
A lot of
all the
patience.
potential characteristics and lenses. And yeah, so if we could change that, and then to see those role models, which I didn't see, I'm sure you didn't see, so critical to see that career path and have something to follow and a light that you're kind of seeking out, and to be able to say, I'm not the first, because breaking through that cement ceiling is I think what discourages so many of us, and deprives organizations of our best gifts. Is it's a loss for organizations when we leave. It's because they need us for business, they need us for product development, they need us for effective customer communications and recruiting and everything, like. But to sort of let that kind of leave is the crime. And then to sort of complain or blame it on, I can't find enough, or they leave and I don't know why. you know no, let's not leave it to chance. Let's say, and they're doing it with boards. They're, in California, big deal, like one woman needs to be on every public board by, I think
Which
it's
is
this
also, we
year.
know, is not effective. And that's one woman is not,
Right.
you need to have more than one. So, I mean, you just sit her
Needs
there.
to be three.
Yeah. I mean, like,
Yeah,
sit her there, and then she's now like, oh, all the microaggressions. And so she,
that's right. That's right. She gets tired, right? So it's got to be 3 out of every 10 is kind of the
yes. Yeah.
metric
That's
we
the next,
use, the
yeah.
rule of 3, so that you can be more than just your identity. You can be a person, and be
Yes.
seen that way, and also feel that you're not, all eyes don't always turn to you when the question comes up about
Wait,
inclusion and
wait.
diversity.
Here you are, like, you're carrying your community on your shoulders, and
You are.
things that you probably do not even experience, but you're expected to answer, respond for the whole community because you identify with them.
I
And if
know.
that product goes sour, it's your fault because we asked the one person in the room. That's
That's
why we
right.
have them here. So yes.
That's not good. No, no, no. So that's my wish, is the representation, more than one, no tokenization, all levels, all levels. And
All
let's not be afraid. Like, look, Europe made boards diverse with that mandate a couple of years
yes.
ago, 40% of women on board, on public boards. And I like to say, A, the women appeared, big surprise, non-surprise. And B, the sky didn't fall and the business world didn't crumble.
Yeah.
Right. So to say that, oh, well, they're not ready, or we can't find them, like all this stuff, we just need to neutralize it. But I honestly feel like, it's carrot and stick. Like, I spend so much time in the carrot land, and I wish I had more stick, because I know this is good for business and good for the world. And I know that it won't destroy anything, but somehow others somehow think like, oh, well, if I share what I have, then there's going to be less for me, and all of that, like, self,
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
really.
There's enough seats.
There are a
There are,
lot of
there are a
seats.
lot of seats.
Yes, pull up the folding chair, like Shirley Chisholm
Shirley
said.
Chisholm, right? Bring your own chair. So our very last one. So what's your hashtag? You
Oh, thank you for
create your own
asking.
hashtag for
My hashtag.
diversity inclusion. For inclusion, what would be your hashtag? And you
Oh
can't
my
just say
gosh.
inclusion.
Right. Okay. Thank you. You needed to say that. Um, Boy, I would say whole self.
Mm,
I love that concept.
that's enough.
The visible and
A whole nother
invisible
session.
parts of us. That's a whole other interview. Yes.
Wow. Well, thank you so, so much, Jennifer. This has been
You're welcome.
amazing. You guys, make sure you reach out, get the book, get both of the books. There's a
Please.
part 1 and a part 2. Basically, I call them part 1 and part 2,
Yeah,
but
they kind of are. They kind of
yeah,
are.
get the books. And for the people who are in our community, who are in the HR for her community, make sure you go ahead and get the free gift that she's left for everyone. Thank you so much again, Jennifer. And
Thank you so much,
we look forward
Seba.
to connecting with you even more.
I enjoyed this so much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.